The champagne had already been poured when the alarm went off. I remember the exact moment, because I was holding my glass halfway to my mouth, standing on the observation deck of the Ring Station Orantine, surrounded by delegates from 11 different worlds, all of us watching the projection of a blue and green planet spinning slowly in the air above us. Earth, the planet everyone in that room had come to toast the death of. My name is Vektarian Osai, and I am a cartographer by training, a historian by accident, and on that night, I was the only person in the room who did not raise my glass. To the end of a dangerous age, said Ambassador Threll of the Cello Compact, lifting her cup so the golden light caught the ridges along her throat. To a galaxy finally at peace. Around her, delegates cheered. Someone laughed. Someone else began recounting, for perhaps the 10th time that evening, the story of the human colony fleet that had tried to force its way through the Threll corridor 40 years ago, and how the joint quarantine fleet had ended that ambition in a single afternoon. It was one of a dozen stories like it, all leading to the same place. Humanity had been loud, fast, hungry, and reckless, and one by one, every world they touched had eventually gone silent. Their homeworld had gone dark last of all, 4 decades ago, and no signal, no ship, no whisper had come from that direction since. Tonight, the Compact had finally declared it official. Homo sapiens, extinct. I did not share the mood. I never had, not because I admired humans, but because something about the silence had always bothered me. A species that fought as hard as they did, that expanded as fast as they did, simply did not fade out quietly. Wars end in surrender, in treaties, in wreckage that can be counted and catalogued. This had ended in nothing, just an absence, stretching longer and longer, until absence became easier to believe than the alternative. I was still holding that thought when the alarm cut through the music. It was not loud, it was not even meant for the room. It came from a comm panel near the far wall, a small chime, meant only for technical staff. But the room was quiet enough that everyone heard it, and quiet enough that everyone saw the young technician, a fair eye named Dost, go pale as he read his display. "Ambassador," he said, and his voice cracked slightly on the word. "You need to see this." Threll set down her glass. "See what?" "The Sol relay beacon," Dost said, "the one on the edge of the old human system. It has been dormant for 41 years. He looked up. It just came back online. Nobody moved for a long moment. Then the laughter started again, quieter this time, edged with relief instead of joy. "Equipment failure," someone offered. "Old hardware settling. It happens." "It is possible," Dost admitted, "but the signal is not random noise. It is structured. It is a call and response pattern, the kind used for identification and rally." "Rally for what?" Threll asked. "There is no one left to rally." I set my own glass down on the nearest railing, because my hands had started to feel unsteady, and I walked toward the technician's station before anyone could stop me. "Show me," I said. Dost glanced at Threll, who waved a hand in permission more out of irritation than curiosity, and the technician turned his display so I could see it. A waveform. Simple, clean, repeating every few seconds, exactly the kind of signal you would use if you wanted to say, "I am here," without wasting power saying anything more complicated than that. "How old is the beacon itself?" I asked. "Older than the war," Dost said. "It predates even the first quarantine actions. Some kind of automated relay left over from before the fighting started. And it has been silent this entire time." "Completely. Until tonight." Dost nodded, and something in his expression told me he understood why that timing mattered, even if he could not yet say why out loud. Tonight, of all nights, the night the Compact chose to declare humanity finished. I stayed at that console far longer than the celebration around me continued, watching the signal pulse, again and again, patient and steady, like something waiting for exactly this moment to wake up. Around midnight station time, the party began to wind down. Ambassador Threll gave a final toast about turning a new page in galactic history, and delegates drifted off toward transports and private quarters, already half forgetting the technician's interruption, already filing it under old hardware, nothing more. I did not forget it. I stayed until the observation deck was nearly empty, until only a handful of staff remained cleaning glasses and dimming lights, And that was when the second signal arrived. Dost found me still at the console, and practically ran the last few steps toward me, his tablet held out like it might bite him. "Cartographer Osai," he said, "you should see this before I report it." I took the tablet from him. On it was a star chart, one I recognized instantly, because I had helped draft an earlier version of it myself. It marked every system once touched by human colonization, color-coded by status. Green for active, yellow for contested, red for destroyed or abandoned. By the time the war ended, the entire chart had gone red, one system at a time, until nothing green remained. Except now, on the chart in my hands, one of those red systems had turned back to green. "Where is this?" I asked, though some part of me already suspected the answer would matter more than I wanted it to. "System designation, Corvain Delta," Dost said, 300 light-years from Sol, a human colony world. Officially glassed 22 years ago during the second quarantine action, there should be nothing left down there but craters and dust. And yet it just answered the beacon, Dost said. The exact same call and response pattern, structured, deliberate, and clean. I looked at that single green dot sitting alone on a chart otherwise soaked in red, and I felt something cold settle into my chest, the particular kind of cold that comes not from fear of the unknown, but from the sudden suspicion that you have been wrong about something important for a very long time. "Has anyone else seen this?" I asked. "Not yet. I came to you first." "Why me?" Dost hesitated, glancing back toward the mostly empty deck, the last few delegates drifting out through the far doors. "Because you were the only one who did not toast tonight," he said. "I thought you would want to know, before the others decide what it means for you." He was more right than either of us understood at the time. I told him to keep the signal quiet for a few hours, while I checked something myself, and he agreed, though I could tell it cost him something to sit on information that large. I spent those hours pulling up every archive I could access on Corvain Delta, and what I found only deepened the unease sitting in my chest. The official compact report on the system's destruction was thinner than it should have been for an operation of that scale. No independent verification, no follow-up survey. Just a single fleet report claiming the surface had been rendered uninhabitable, filed and accepted without question, because by then, nobody wanted to spend more resources double-checking the extinction of a species everyone had already decided to stop worrying about. By the time the station's early cycle lights came up, 3 more colonies had answered. Not new signals, not new discoveries. Systems already marked red on every chart in compact space. Places we had been told for years held nothing but debris and dead soil, each one responding to that same patient beacon from Sol, with the same structured pulse, over and over, like a chorus, slowly finding its voice again, after a very long silence. I brought what I had to Ambassador Threll myself, before Dost could be blamed for delaying it, and I will admit, I expected her to dismiss me the way she had dismissed the technician the night before. Instead, when she saw the chart with 4 green dots glowing where there should have been none, her expression did something I had never seen from her in the years I had known her. It went blank, the particular blankness of someone recalculating everything they believed to be true, all at once, and not liking any of the numbers they were getting. "This cannot be verified data," she said quietly. "It has to be some kind of interference. An echo. A recording left running on old equipment. 4 separate systems," I said. 4 separate responses. All different signal signatures, all responding to the same call within hours of each other. That is not an echo, Ambassador. That is a conversation. A conversation with whom? I did not have an answer for that yet, and I told her so honestly, because I did not believe in offering false comfort, even to someone who clearly wanted it. What I did tell her was this: whatever had gone quiet 40 years ago had not been destroyed, it had been waiting. And now, for reasons none of us yet understood, it had decided the waiting was over. Threll called an emergency council session within the hour, gathering delegates who had gone to bed still smiling about the end of a dangerous age, dragging them back into a room that suddenly felt far too small for the number of empty champagne glasses still sitting on its tables. I stood near the back as she presented the chart, watched confusion turn to disbelief, turn to something closer to fear, as more responses trickled in, even during the meeting itself. 5, then 6, then 7 systems, all supposedly dead, all suddenly speaking again. And through all of it, one thought kept circling in my mind, refusing to let me feel any of the relief the others seemed to expect a historian might feel at the correction of a mistaken record. If 7 dead worlds could answer a call that easily, after 40 years of silence so complete it fooled every survey, every fleet report, every historian in the compact, including me, then the silence itself had never been the absence of humanity at all. It had been a choice. And I did not yet know what they had spent those 40 years choosing to become. The council did not sleep that night, and neither did I. By the time the emergency session reached its 3rd hour, the number of responding systems had climbed to 11, and the mood in the chamber had curdled from disbelief into something closer to panic, dressed up as procedure. Delegates argued over wording. Some wanted the term anomaly used in any public statement. Others wanted resurgence. Nobody wanted to say the word that was actually sitting in every mind in that room, which was simply survival. Ambassador Threll finally turned to me near the end of that session, her patience worn down to something thin and brittle. "You are the one who noticed this before anyone else," she said, "so you will be the one who confirms it in person. I want a fact-finding mission sent to the nearest responding system, and I want you leading it." I had expected many things that night, but not that. I am a cartographer, Ambassador, not a diplomat, and certainly not a soldier. "Which is exactly why you are going," she said. "I do not need someone who will start another war down there. I need someone who will look at what is actually on the ground and tell me the truth, even if the truth is inconvenient." She paused, and for just a moment, the exhaustion in her face looked almost human, which struck me as a strange thing to notice given everything else happening that night, especially if it is inconvenient. The nearest responding system was Corvain Delta, the same colony that had turned green on the chart in the first hours of the crisis, 300 light-years from Sol, and 22 years past its supposed destruction. A small survey vessel was assigned to me within the day, crewed by a skeleton team who had all, in one way or another, spent their careers studying humanity from a very safe distance. None of us had ever expected to meet one in person. None of us were certain we still could. The journey took 12 days, and I spent most of them reviewing every scrap of information the Compact had ever gathered on Corvain Delta, trying to reconcile the thin, hurried destruction report with a colony that had apparently just spoken clearly enough to be heard across 300 light-years. The report described a fleet action, standard quarantine procedure, orbital bombardment sufficient to render the surface uninhabitable. It listed no survivors, no follow-up survey, and no images taken after the operation concluded. At the time, I remember thinking that was simply how the war had been fought in its final years. Fast, brutal, and increasingly uninterested in verifying its own outcomes. Now I wondered how many other reports in that same archive had been just as thin, just as convenient, just as unverified. We dropped out of transit at the edge of the system on the 12th day, and the first thing I noticed was that Corvain Delta's star looked exactly as it should, a calm yellow sun, with nothing unusual in its light, nothing to suggest the violence supposedly done to the world orbiting it. The second thing I noticed was that we were not alone. Sensors picked up debris fields scattered through the outer system, exactly where the destruction report said they should be. Twisted metal and cold hulks drifting in slow orbits, the visible remains of a colony fleet that had, by every appearance, been destroyed decades ago. My crew relaxed slightly at the sight of it, because it matched the record, because it looked like confirmation rather than contradiction. I did not relax. Something about the debris bothered me before I could name what it was, and it took nearly an hour of close scanning before our engineer, a quiet Farai named Orit, found the answer and brought it to me, with visible confusion on her face. "Cartographer," she said, "this wreckage is wrong." "Wrong how?" "The metal fatigue does not match 22 years of exposure. Some of these hulls are corroded, as if they have been out here for decades, yes, but the internal components, where I can scan them, are far too clean. No radiation scarring consistent with the weapons used in the original quarantine strike. No hull breach patterns consistent with orbital bombardment at all." She looked up at me. "Cartographer, I do not think this is wreckage from a battle. I think someone built this to look like wreckage from a battle." I felt that same cold settle into my chest again, the same feeling I'd had staring at a green dot, where a red one should have been. A decoy field. It would explain everything, Orit said slowly, working through the implication as she spoke it aloud. If you wanted the galaxy to believe your colony had been destroyed, and you knew a survey might eventually come looking to confirm it, you would not just fake the surface damage, you would fake the debris in orbit too. You would build it to decay convincingly, to read as decades old to any scan that did not look too closely. That is an extraordinary amount of effort to fake your own death. It is, Oret agreed, which makes me wonder, what kind of species would consider that effort worth spending? I did not have to wonder long. As our vessel began its slow approach toward the inner system, moving carefully between drifting hulks that I now understood to be elaborate props rather than genuine casualties, a new signal reached us, and this one was not automated. It was a voice. Unidentified vessel, the voice said, calm and unhurried, speaking in accented but perfectly understandable compact trade language. You have entered a system that is not marked as active on any current registry. State your designation and your intention before you proceed further. My crew froze. I stepped forward to the comm station myself, aware that whatever I said in the next few seconds might matter more than anything I had said in my entire career. This is cartographer Vectarian Osai of the Cello Compact Survey Vessel Halcyon Reach, I said, keeping my voice as steady as I could manage. We received a signal response from this system, originating from a beacon we believe to be defunct. We are here to verify its source, and to understand what we are seeing. There was a pause long enough that I began to wonder if the channel had simply closed. Then the voice returned, and this time there was something almost amused in it, though carefully controlled. You want to understand what you are seeing, the voice repeated. That is a reasonable thing to want. Hold your current position and power down your weapon systems. We will send an escort. We are a survey vessel, I said. We are not armed. I know, the voice said. I am telling you to power down your weapon systems so that when my escort arrives, everyone on both sides remains calm enough to have a conversation instead of an incident. Please confirm. I gave the order, and felt Orit's eyes on me the entire time, silently asking whether I understood what I had just agreed to. I did not fully, but I understood enough to know that whoever was speaking to us had already decided how this encounter was going to go, and the only real choice we had was whether to walk into it cooperatively or not at all. The escort arrived 40 minutes later, and it was not what any of us expected. I had, somewhere in my training, absorbed the same image everyone in the compact carried of human ships, bulky and aggressive, built for speed and violence in equal measure, the kind of vessels that had torn through quarantine lines in the war's early years before finally being ground down by numbers. The ship that fell into formation alongside the Halcyon Reach bore almost no resemblance to that image. It was sleek, quiet, its hull marked with faded but deliberate patterns that Orit identified, after a moment's study, as camouflage designed to scatter certain kinds of long-range scans. It did not look like a warship preparing for battle. It looked like something built to be overlooked. They have been hiding, Orit murmured, almost to herself, not surviving in ruins. Hiding, on purpose, and getting very good at it. A second voice came through the comm, different from the first, lighter, quicker, with an edge of genuine curiosity in it, rather than careful control. Halcyon Reach, this is escort vessel Wayfinder, the voice said. I'm Lieutenant Grace Whitfield. We're going to bring you in nice and slow, and I promise nobody is going to touch your ship or your crew. I know this is probably the strangest day you've had in a long while. I'd like it to stay that way, instead of getting worse. Lieutenant, I said carefully, may I ask a direct question? You can ask. Can't promise I'll answer everything. Is this Corvain Delta, the colony reported destroyed 22 years ago? There was a short pause, and when Whitfield answered, there was something almost gentle in her tone, the tone of someone delivering news she had clearly expected to deliver eventually, just not quite this soon. It is, she said. And it isn't destroyed. It never was. You're about to see something your compact hasn't seen in a very long time, cartographer. I'd get comfortable, if I were you. We followed the Wayfinder inward, through the false debris field, past props built to convince the galaxy of a lie that had apparently worked for 22 years, and as the planet itself finally swung into view on our forward display, I understood, with the particular clarity that only arrives after a long, slow dawning of dread, that everything the compact believed about the ending of humanity had been built on exactly the kind of wreckage we had just passed through. Convincing from a distance, hollow up close, and deliberately, carefully designed so that no one would ever think to look any closer than that, until the day someone finally did. The planet itself looked nothing like the report had described. Where the compact archive claimed a scorched, uninhabitable surface, cratered and dead, I saw green continents wrapped in cloud, oceans catching the light of a calm yellow sun, and scattered across the daylight side, clusters of light that could only be settlements, cities, not ruins. Cities, quietly humming with life, exactly where none was supposed to exist. Cartographer, Orette said quietly beside me, her voice unusually careful. The destruction report said, this world was rendered uninhabitable for at least a century. I am aware, I said, and found I had no better answer than that. The Wayfinder guided us down through a controlled descent corridor, past a network of orbital defenses so well concealed that our own scanners had registered nothing until we were already inside their range, and it was only then, watching those defenses light up briefly to confirm our identity, before dimming again, that I understood how thoroughly we had been allowed to see exactly what they wanted us to see, and not one measurement more. We landed at a facility on the edge of what I would later learn was the colony's largest city, a place called Meridian Hold, built into the shoulder of a low mountain range so that from orbit its structures blended almost seamlessly into the rock itself. Lieutenant Whitfield met us at the base of our own ramp, a tall woman with sun-worn skin and an expression that managed to be both welcoming and watchful at the same time, flanked by two others who introduced themselves simply as Daniel and Charlotte, both dressed in the same practical, unmarked clothing as everyone else moving through the facility around us. "You'll want to see the captain," Whitfield said, without much preamble. "She's been waiting a long time for someone from your side to actually show up and ask the right questions, instead of just filing another report nobody checks." "The captain," I repeated. "Naomi Reyes-Osei," Whitfield said. "She's led this colony since before you people decided we were all dead. I think you'll want to hear what she has to say directly, rather than through me." They walked us through corridors that told their own quiet story, workshops full of careful, patient engineering, classrooms with children's drawings pinned to the walls, gardens grown under filtered light, in rooms clearly designed to keep the colony fed without depending on anything that could be spotted from orbit. Everywhere I looked, I saw the marks of a people who had built an entire functioning civilization around the discipline of never being noticed, and who had apparently succeeded so completely that an entire galaxy had spent 22 years mourning them without a single doubt. Naomi Reyes-Osei met us in a plain room at the heart of the facility, seated at a table that looked like it had been built by hand rather than replicated, and when she rose to greet us, I found myself facing a woman who looked, on the surface, entirely unremarkable. Middle-aged, steady eyes, hands marked with the kind of calluses that come from real physical work rather than ceremonial gestures. It was only when she spoke that I understood why an entire colony had chosen to follow her into decades of silence. "Cartographer Osei," she said, and there was no surprise in her voice at all, only a kind of tired recognition, as though she had rehearsed this meeting many times in her own mind, long before it happened. "I understand you're the one who noticed the beacon before anyone else did." "I am," I said, "though I confess I still do not fully understand what I noticed." "Sit," she said, gesturing to a chair across from her own. "I'll tell you as much as I can, and you can decide for yourself what to do with it afterward. I think you've earned that much, coming all this way instead of just filing a follow-up report and calling it settled." I sat. Orette and the others remained standing near the door, and Reyes-Osei did not seem to mind the audience. "You know the official story," she said. "Humanity fought the quarantine fleets, lost badly in the final years, and went silent. Earth stopped transmitting. The colonies were confirmed destroyed, one after another, until there was nothing left to confirm. That's the story your compact told itself. And honestly, cartographer, it wasn't entirely wrong. We did lose the war. We lost it badly enough that continuing to fight it would have meant losing everything else along with it. Then how?" "I'm getting there," she said, not unkindly. "We didn't lose the argument for existing, because we ran out of ships, or ran out of soldiers, though we were running low on both by the end. We lost it because we ran out of anyone willing to listen to a species that kept insisting it deserved a place among the stars, while proving, over and over, that it couldn't stop reaching for more of them. That's what your quarantine fleets were really enforcing, near the end. Not a war, a verdict. I said nothing, because I had read enough of the old records to know she was not wrong about that either. So somewhere in those final years, she went on, a group of us stopped trying to win the argument, and started planning for what would happen after we lost it completely. We knew Earth couldn't hold. We knew the colonies that kept broadcasting, kept trading, kept doing everything visibly human, were going to be found and ended one by one. So we made a choice. We would let the galaxy believe exactly what it already wanted to believe. That we were finished, and underneath that belief, we would keep going anyway, quietly, patiently, without giving anyone a reason to look twice. The debris fields, I said slowly. The falsified destruction reports. Some of that we built ourselves, over years, long before the actual strikes came, seeding decoys that would decay convincingly by the time anyone thought to check. Some of it, I won't lie to you, we simply let happen. Real losses we didn't fake at all, because a lie only survives if it's mixed with enough truth that no one thinks to look for the difference. For the first time, something in her steady expression flickered. Something closer to grief than strategy. We lost real people making that lie convincing, cartographer. I want you to understand that clearly. This wasn't a trick played for free. How many colonies did the same? I asked. How many are like this one? More than your compact ever imagined, she said. Some you knew about and marked dead. Some you never knew existed at all. Founded quietly in the chaos of the war's final years by people who saw exactly where things were heading, and left before anyone thought to count them. 40 years is a long time to build, cartographer, when nobody is watching you do it. I thought of the star chart, that single green dot turning back on among a field of red, and felt the true scale of what she was describing settle over me for the first time. Not one hidden colony, not a handful, an entire second history of humanity, built in secret, running parallel to the one the rest of the galaxy had confidently written into its own records as finished. And the beacon, I said, the one at Sol. Why now? Why answer after 40 years of silence, on the exact night my compact chose to declare you extinct? For the first time since we had sat down, Naomi Reyes Osei allowed herself something close to a smile, though it held no humor in it at all. Because that beacon was never a distress signal, cartographer, she said. It was a promise we made to each other before we scattered. A single rally call, agreed on decades ago, that would only ever be triggered under one condition. What condition? That the galaxy had well and truly stopped watching, she said. That whatever remained of humanity's enemies had convinced themselves the danger was over, completely and permanently, with no doubt left in their minds at all. We needed that certainty, cartographer. We needed you to believe it so completely that you would finally stop looking, just long enough for every colony that had been hiding for a generation to come home without a war, meeting us at the door. I sat back slowly, feeling the shape of the entire crisis rearrange itself around me. The gala, the toasts, the confident, relieved declaration of extinction that Ambassador Threll had made with such certainty only days earlier. It had not simply been an unfortunate coincidence of timing. It had been the trigger itself. You were waiting for us to celebrate, I said quietly. We were waiting for you to believe it, Reyes Osei corrected gently. The celebration just happened to be the clearest proof we'd been listening for. A species doesn't throw a party over an enemy it's still afraid of, cartographer. It throws a party when it's finally convinced there's nothing left to fear. She met my eyes without flinching. You gave us that proof yourselves, in front of the whole compact, on a night none of you thought anyone was still listening. And every colony that had been waiting for exactly that signal heard it, and answered. I thought about Dost's pale face at the console, the first pulse of the beacon breaking through a party built on the assumption of humanity's ending, and understood, with a chill that had nothing to do with the room's temperature, that we had not stumbled onto a secret at all. We had been watched into revealing that it was finally safe to end one. What happens now? I asked, because it was the only question left that mattered. Naomi Reyes Osei rose from her seat, and for a moment, she looked less like a colony leader, and more like someone bracing herself for a task she had been dreading and preparing for in equal measure. for longer than I could imagine. Now, she said, the rest of us come home. All of us, all at once, exactly the way we planned. And your compact is going to have to decide, very quickly, whether it wants to meet a species it thought it had already finished, on terms that are no longer entirely its own to set. She walked to the room's single window, looking out over a city the galaxy had spent 22 years believing was rubble, and I found I had no argument to offer her, because everything I had seen since stepping off my own ship told me she was simply describing what was already, unstoppably, underway. The return journey to Orantine took 12 days, and every single one of them arrived carrying worse news than the last. I received the updates in fragments, relayed through the Halcyon Reach's comm system in Ambassador Threll's increasingly strained voice, each transmission a little tighter than the one before it. By the third day, the number of responding systems had climbed past 30. By the sixth, it had passed 60, and among them were names that appeared on no compact chart at all, colonies founded quietly during the war's final chaos, and never once detected, now simply announcing themselves as though they had always had every right to exist. They are not attacking anything, Threll told me on the 9th day, and I could hear, even through the distortion of deep space transmission, how carefully she was choosing each word, as though the wrong one might tip something irreversible. That is what frightens the Council more than an attack would. If they were attacking, we would understand what we were looking at. This is worse. This is patience. By the time the Halcyon Reach finally dropped back into range of Orantine Station, the mood I returned to bore no resemblance at all to the celebration I had left. The observation deck where champagne had been poured in confident, careless toasts had been converted into a full emergency command center. Delegates crowded around projection tables, showing a star chart that had, in the space of 2 weeks, turned almost entirely green, where it had once been almost entirely red. Ambassador Threll met me at the docking bay herself, which told me more about the state of the Council than any briefing could have. "Tell me everything," she said, without preamble, walking briskly enough that I had to lengthen my stride to keep pace. "Everything you saw, everything she told you, all of it, now." I told her. I told her about the false debris fields built to decay convincingly across decades, about cities hidden in mountains, and gardens grown under filtered light, about a rally signal agreed upon before the war's final defeat, and held in reserve for exactly the moment the galaxy stopped watching closely enough to notice it triggering. I told her about Naomi Reyes Osei and the particular calm with which she had described a plan that had clearly cost her people far more than any of us in that room had ever considered. Threll listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she said nothing for a long moment, staring at the projection table where the chart continued to shift, green spreading a little further with each passing hour. "They let us believe we had won," she said finally, quietly, more to herself than to me. "For 22 years, they let an entire compact believe a war had been settled, simply because it was easier for us to stop looking than it was for them to keep hiding forever." "I believe that is accurate," I said. "And the beacon activated the exact night we declared them extinct. Because we finally believed it completely enough to celebrate," I said. "That was the proof they were waiting for. Not silence, certainty." Threll closed her eyes briefly, and when she opened them again, something in her posture had changed, hardened into the particular stillness of someone preparing to argue a position she did not entirely want to hold. "There are members of this council," she said, "who believe the correct response to that revelation is to strike now, while we still believe we hold an advantage, before whatever they have built finishes assembling itself into something we cannot answer at all. Do you believe that?" "I believe," she said carefully, "that a species patient enough to hide successfully for 40 years is not a species that will be caught unprepared by a strike from people who only just discovered they exist." She met my eyes. "I believe the council is frightened, cartographer, and frightened councils make decisions they cannot take back." We reached the main chamber to find it in the middle of exactly the argument Threll had described. Delegates from half a dozen worlds raising voices over one another, some demanding immediate mobilization of compact defense fleets, others urging caution, still others simply demanding more information than anyone in the room actually possessed. I took my place near the projection table, watching the chart update in real time, green consuming red system by system, and it was somewhere in the middle of that shouting match that the sensors picked up the arrival. A single vessel, dropping out of transit at the edge of the Orantine system, unannounced, unescorted, and entirely unhurried. The chamber fell silent almost instantly, every delegate turning toward the projection as the ship's profile resolved into detail. It was larger than anything Whitfield's Wayfinder had prepared me for, sleek in the same deliberate, understated way, its hull carrying markings that Orit, standing near me with her tablet already scanning furiously, identified within seconds. "That is a flagship," she said, her voice tight. "Command configuration, heavy defensive systems, and cartographer. Its transponder is broadcasting an open identification. It is not trying to hide at all." "Who is aboard?" someone in the chamber demanded. The answer came not from our own scanners, but from the ship itself, a single transmission arriving on every open channel across the station simultaneously, calm, measured, and utterly without apology. "This is Fleet Commander Naomi Reyes Osei," the voice said, and I recognized it instantly from the plane room in Meridian Hold where I had sat across from her only weeks earlier. "I am requesting permission to dock at Orantine Station, unarmed escort, to address the full Compact Council directly. I believe several of you already have some understanding of why I am here." The chamber erupted into fresh argument, half the delegates demanding the ship be turned away or fired upon before it came any closer, the other half insisting that any hostile action now, against a single vessel that had announced itself openly rather than attempting to strike unseen, would be both strategically foolish and impossible to justify afterward. I watched Ambassador Threll standing very still at the center of it all, and understood that whatever she decided in the next few minutes would likely be remembered, one way or another, for as long as either species survived to remember anything at all. "Ambassador," I said quietly, stepping close enough that only she would hear me over the noise. She did not have to announce herself. She did not have to come alone, in a single ship, transmitting an open identification for every sensor in this system to see. If she wanted to demonstrate strength through violence, Ambassador, she has had every opportunity to do so already, across 60 responding systems and rising, and she has not taken a single one of them. Then what is she demonstrating? That she does not need to, I said, and I believe that frightens this council far more than an attack would have, because an attack, at least, would be something we already know how to answer. Threll looked at me for a long moment, then turned back to the chamber, raising her voice over the arguing delegates, with the particular authority of someone who had finally decided which risk she was willing to take. "Stand down defensive systems," she said. "Grant the vessel docking clearance. And clear this chamber for a full council session." She looked around at the frightened, uncertain faces surrounding her. "We celebrated an ending 2 weeks ago that was never actually ours to declare. I think it is past time we found out, directly, what we are actually facing, instead of what we assumed." The order went out, and across the chamber I watched the projection update one final time as the flagship began its slow, unhurried approach toward the station, exactly as calm and exactly as patient as everything else I had witnessed since the moment that first beacon had broken a silence 40 years in the making. Nobody in that chamber spoke for a long while after the docking sequence began. I think, in that silence, most of us were quietly reckoning with the same realization I had reached weeks earlier, standing over a technician's console, at a party meant to bury a species that had, in truth, simply been waiting the entire time, for exactly this moment, to walk back through the door. Naomi Reyes Osei walked into the council chamber alone. No honor guard, no weapons visible on her person. She wore the same practical clothing I had seen on nearly everyone at Meridian Hold, and she carried nothing in her hands except a small data slate, which she set down on the central table without ceremony, before looking around at the assembled delegates, most of whom had gone very quiet at her entrance. "Thank you for allowing me to speak directly," she said. "I know that was not an easy decision for this council, given the last 2 weeks." Ambassador Threll rose from her seat at the head of the table, and I could see the effort it cost her to keep her voice level. "Fleet Commander, 2 weeks ago, this compact declared your species extinct. Now 63 systems we believe dead have answered a signal we did not know existed, and you have arrived here alone, aboard a flagship, announcing yourself openly. I think this council deserves to understand exactly what that means before anything else is discussed." "It means exactly what it looks like," Reyes Osei said. "We are not extinct. We were never extinct. We made a choice, decades ago, to let this compact believe otherwise, because believing otherwise was the only way we were going to survive long enough to come back at all. And now that you have come back, Threll said, what is it you intend to do with that survival? I watched Reyes Osei's expression carefully in that moment, because I suspected, correctly as it turned out, that whatever she said next would matter more than anything said in that chamber for years afterward. I intend to ask this council a question first, she said, before I answer yours. Threll's jaw tightened slightly, but she nodded. Ask it. When your fleets glassed our colonies, Reyes Osei said, when your quarantine actions ended entire settlements, families, generations of people who had never fired a shot at anyone, did this compact ever once stop to verify that the threat you were answering still existed? Or did it simply keep applying the same solution, over and over, because it had become easier than asking whether the solution was still necessary? The chamber was silent. I saw more than one delegate look away, rather than meet her eyes, and I understood, watching them, that she already knew the answer, and had known it for a very long time. I am not asking to shame anyone in this room, she continued, before the silence could curdle into something defensive. I am asking because I think this compact owes itself an honest answer to that question, before we discuss anything else. Because the truth, Ambassador, is that my people did not disappear because we ran out of the will to fight. We disappeared because continuing to fight had stopped being a fight at all, and had simply become something your fleets did to us, again and again, whether or not we had given you fresh cause. That is one telling of events, Threll said carefully. It is not the only one. No, Reyes Osei agreed. It is not. There were years, early in that war, where my people gave this compact every reason to be afraid of us. We expanded too fast. We fought too hard. We treated every new system as though it existed only to be claimed, and we did not stop to ask what already lived there before we claimed it. I am not here to pretend humanity was blameless in how that war began, Ambassador. We were not. Something in that admission seemed to catch the room off guard more than anything she had said before it, and I understood, watching the shift in posture around the table, that they had expected either an apology with nothing behind it, or a challenge with nothing tempering it, and had not prepared themselves for someone willing to offer both truths at once. But somewhere in those final years, Reyes Osei went on, the war stopped being about anything we were still doing, and became simply about finishing what had already been started. Colonies that had gone quiet, that posed no active threat to anyone, were still targeted, still ended, because ending them was easier than reconsidering whether they needed to be ended at all. That is the part of this history I do not think this compact has ever honestly reckoned with, and it is the part that made hiding, rather than continuing to fight, or continuing to argue, the only path any of us had left. Ambassador Threll was quiet for a long moment, and when she finally spoke again, her voice had lost some of its earlier hardness. What is it you want from us now, Fleet Commander? 63 systems. Likely more to come. This council needs to understand what humanity intends to do with the strength it apparently kept hidden this entire time. I want exactly what I came here to ask for, Reyes Osei said. Recognition. Not domination. Not tribute. Not apology theater performed for its own sake. Simple, honest recognition that humanity exists, that it has existed the entire time this compact spent congratulating itself on our absence, and that going forward, any decisions made about our worlds will be made with us in the room, rather than about us from a safe distance. And if this council refuses? Someone else at the table asked, a delegate I did not recognize, his voice carrying an edge of challenge he likely regretted the moment Reyes Osei turned her calm attention toward him. Then nothing changes from where you are sitting right now, she said simply. We do not intend to attack anyone. We never did. Every colony that answered that beacon was instructed, decades ago, to return home quietly and defend itself if attacked, not to strike first under any circumstance. If this council refuses recognition, we simply continue existing exactly as we have been existing for 40 years, quietly, patiently, and entirely outside whatever plans this compact makes, without consulting us. She let that sit in the room for a moment, before continuing. The difference, of course, is that this time, you will know we are here. You will not get to celebrate an ending that never actually happened. I think, for many of you, that alone will be reason enough to prefer the alternative. I watched the delegates around that table absorb the full weight of what she had just described, a species that was not threatening violence at all, and somehow making that restraint feel far more unsettling than any threat could have. Ambassador Threll sat back slowly in her chair, and for a long moment, the only sound in the chamber was the quiet hum of the station's systems around us. "You could have arrived with your entire reclaimed fleet," Threll said eventually. "You could have arrived with a demand backed by force this council could not refuse. Instead, you arrived alone, and you are asking rather than demanding." "I am asking," Reyes Osei confirmed, "because a demand backed by force only ever produces obedience, Ambassador. And obedience is exactly what led to this war being fought as badly as it was fought, on both sides. I did not come here for obedience. I came here because I would rather build whatever comes next on something steadier than fear, even if fear would have been faster." It was, I thought, watching her stand there in that quiet chamber, the single most disarming thing she could have said, because it left the council with no argument to make against her, that did not also indict the very habits of thought that had led to the Extinction Gala 2 weeks earlier in the first place. Ambassador Threll rose fully from her seat and addressed the chamber rather than Reyes Osei directly. "I will not pretend this council can resolve, in a single session, 40 years of history, that we have only just discovered we misunderstood this completely." She turned back to Reyes Osei. "But I am prepared to recommend formal recognition of humanity's standing among the systems of this compact, effective immediately, pending full negotiation of terms neither of us are equipped to finalize today." A murmur ran through the delegates at the table, some clearly relieved, others clearly uneasy, but none, I noticed, willing to voice open objection in that moment, whether from genuine agreement or simple exhaustion, with an argument that had already run far longer than any of them had expected 2 weeks earlier. Naomi Reyes Osei inclined her head, and something in her posture eased slightly, the particular release of tension that comes when a long-held burden finally shifts its weight onto steadier ground. "Thank you, Ambassador," she said. "I believe that is a reasonable place to begin." The session ended not long after that, delegates filing out in small, quiet clusters, already murmuring among themselves about what recognition would mean for trade routes, border agreements, decades of compact policy built entirely on the assumption of an empty, uncontested galaxy where humanity had once existed, and now, quite clearly, no longer did. I remained behind in the emptying chamber, watching Naomi Reyes Osei gather her single data slate from the table, and found myself, unexpectedly, wanting to ask her one final question before she returned to her ship. "You forgave us," I said, once the last of the delegates had gone. In front of the entire council. "After everything this compact did to your people." "I did not forgive anyone," she said, turning to face me with an expression that held none of the careful diplomacy she had shown the council only minutes earlier. "I told the truth about what happened, all of it, including the parts that reflect poorly on my own people as well as yours." "That is not forgiveness, cartographer. Forgiveness would mean deciding the harm no longer matters. What I offered your council today was something closer to patience, the same patience that let 63 colonies survive in silence for 40 years without giving in to the temptation of striking first. And if patience had not been enough, if the council had refused recognition entirely." She considered the question for a long moment before answering. "Then we would have kept waiting, cartographer, quietly, indefinitely, building, growing, watching, exactly as we have already proven we know how to do." I think that possibility frightened your ambassador more than any fleet I could have brought with me today, and I think she was right to be frightened by it, because a species that can wait that long, that patiently, without losing itself in the waiting, is not a species that can simply be outlasted. I thought of the champagne glasses still sitting, half-finished, on tables across the observation deck, where this had all begun, a party thrown to celebrate an ending that had, in truth, never come close to happening, and I understood, standing in that emptied chamber, that the story I would eventually write about these weeks would have to begin with a mistake rather than a triumph. Not humanity's mistake, though there had certainly been mistakes enough on that side of the history to fill volumes of their own. Ours. The mistake of believing an absence, however long and however convincing, was the same thing as an ending. "What happens now?" I asked, echoing the same question I had asked her weeks earlier, in a plain room at Meridian Hold, though the answer this time carried none of the uncertainty the first had. "Now," she said, My people come home properly, in full view of a galaxy that finally knows we are here. We rebuild what was lost honestly, rather than in hiding. And this compact, along with every other species watching what happened here today, gets to decide what it actually learned from believing, so completely and so happily, that it had finally seen the last of us. She picked up her data slate and turned toward the door, pausing just once to look back at me. I would be careful, cartographer, about celebrating any ending too quickly in the future. You never quite know who might still be listening when you do. She left the chamber, and I remained behind a while longer, alone, among empty seats and dimmed lights, thinking about the beacon that had broken 40 years of silence at the exact moment a galaxy had finally convinced itself there was nothing left to fear, and about everything that silence had actually been hiding underneath it the entire time. I have spent the months since that council session writing and rewriting the history I was asked to compile, and I find, each time I return to it, that the central lesson refuses to simplify itself into anything as tidy as a moral. The galaxy did not survive humanity's extinction, because that extinction never happened at all. What it survived, instead, was humanity's patience, a patience built out of genuine loss and genuine restraint in equal measure, held steady across 40 years by people who could have struck the moment they regained enough strength to do so, and chose, again and again, not to. I do not know what becomes of the Compact's relationship with the newly recognized worlds of humanity in the years ahead. I do not know whether the trust Naomi Reyes Osei offered so carefully in that chamber will be honored as carefully as it was given, on either side of the arrangement. What I know is this. On the night a galaxy toasted the quiet ending of a species it had decided to stop watching, that species was listening the entire time, waiting only for the certainty that it was finally safe to answer. And when it finally did answer, it did not answer with the war everyone had feared. It answered, simply, by coming home.